The security checkpoint at the Galactic Defense Station buzzed with the usual mix of alien species going about their business. Centauri traders clicked their mandibles while discussing cargo manifests, while tall Veloxian diplomats glided past on their tentacled appendages. Among them, a single human woman stood in the detention line, her hands zip-tied behind her back. Sarah Chen looked unremarkable to most observers. Average height for a human, dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing standard civilian clothes that had seen better days. The only thing that marked her as different was the confident way she held herself, even restrained as she was. "Next," barked Security Officer Thrax, a burly Garanian whose rocky skin made him look like a walking boulder. He gestured for Sarah to step forward with one of his forearms. Sarah approached the scanning station calmly. The detention had started 3 hours ago when she'd attempted to board a transport to the outer colonies. When asked for identification, she'd presented credentials claiming to be a retired human military specialist. The problem was, according to the Galactic database, humans didn't have military specialists capable of the achievements listed in her file. Sarah Chen, Thrax read from his display, his translator making his voice sound like gravel in a cement mixer, claims to be a former Navy SEAL from Earth. Problem is, we've never heard of Navy SEALs, and your planet's military records show no such unit exists. Sarah remained silent, her gray eyes fixed on a point just over the security officer's shoulder. She'd learned long ago that sometimes the best response was no response at all. The penalty for falsifying military credentials is severe. Human, Thrax continued, clearly enjoying his authority, especially when those credentials claim impossible feats. According to this file, you supposedly completed underwater demolitions training, survived Arctic warfare conditions for 6 months, and led covert operations behind enemy lines. Humans are barely capable of basic space travel, let alone such advanced military operations. Around them, other aliens had begun to take notice. A group of Centauri chittered among themselves, their compound eyes reflecting the station's artificial lighting. Even the usually aloof Veloxians had slowed their gliding pace to observe the situation. "What's particularly amusing," Thrax said, warming to his audience, "is that this file claims you served in something called DevGru and participated in operations that supposedly saved entire star systems. The imagination of you humans never ceases to entertain us." Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Those operations weren't imagination. They were classified beyond anything the Galactic Council had clearance to access. The Kethmore invasion of the Rigel system, the hostage situation on Europa Station, the deep space reconnaissance, missions that had revealed the Void Fleet's movements 2 years before their planned assault on inhabited worlds, but explaining any of that would require revealing information that could destabilize the entire galactic political structure. Earth's government had made it clear that certain aspects of human military capability were to remain strictly compartmentalized. The galaxy wasn't ready to know what humans were truly capable of when pushed to their limits. "I notice you're not denying the charges," Thrax observed, his rocky features forming what might have been a smile. "Smart, lying to Galactic. Security carries additional penalties." What the Garanian security officer didn't know was that Sarah Chen wasn't just any former Navy SEAL. She was the Navy SEAL who had single-handedly infiltrated a Kethmore command ship and extracted intelligence that prevented a war that would have claimed billions of lives. She was the operator who had spent 8 months behind enemy lines during the Shadow conflict, feeding information back to Earth that allowed human forces to anticipate and counter every major Void Fleet movement. She was also the woman who had trained the first generation of human deep space operatives, the ones whose existence was so classified that their own families believed they worked in asteroid mining or atmospheric processing. The charges are falsifying military credentials, impersonating a galactic defense specialist, and attempting to gain passage under false pretenses, Thrax announced loudly enough for the growing crowd to hear. The sentence is typically 5 to 10 standard years in a penal colony, depending on the severity of the deception. Sarah's expression remained neutral, but her mind was already calculating. The detention area had 6 exits, 2 of which were maintenance corridors that most species couldn't access due to their size. The gravity here was 0.85 standard, lighter than Earth normal, which would give her an advantage if things went sideways. 3 guards, all Garanian, strong but slow, Standard energy restraints that could be overloaded if she could access the maintenance panel behind the scanning station. But she wouldn't act. Not yet. Her current mission was too important to compromise over a simple misunderstanding. The intelligence she carried about the returning Void Fleet was worth more than her personal freedom. Someone would sort this out eventually, someone with the proper clearance and authority. While we process your sentencing, Thrax continued, you'll be held in detention cell 7. I hope you enjoyed your little fantasy of being some kind of human super soldier, because reality is about to set in very quickly. As the security officer reached for her arm to escort her to the holding area, the station's communication system crackled to life. The voice that emerged spoke in crisp, authoritative galactic standard, but with an unmistakably human accent. Security Station Alpha. This is Admiral Rodriguez requesting immediate status on any human detainees currently in your custody. Thrax paused, his hand halfway to Sarah's shoulder. Admiral Rodriguez was a name that carried weight throughout the galaxy. The human who had coordinated the defense of the Outer Rim during the last major conflict, the tactical genius who had outmaneuvered 3 different alien military commanders and earned their grudging respect. Admiral Rodriguez, this is Security Officer Thrax. We do have one human female in custody for falsifying military credentials. There was a long pause on the communication channel. When the Admiral's voice returned, it carried a tone that made even the confident Garanian security officer step back slightly. What name is she using, Officer Thrax? Sarah Chen, sir. Claims to be a former Navy SEAL, which our records indicate is not a real military unit. Another pause. Longer this time. Then barely audible through the comm system. The sound that would change everything. A sharp intake of breath that sounded remarkably like a hiss of recognition and something approaching fear. The communication channel fell silent for what felt like an eternity. Security Officer Thrax shifted uncomfortably, his rocky features showing the first signs of uncertainty since the detention had begun. Around them, the crowd of onlookers had grown larger. Drawn by the mention of Admiral Rodriguez's name, Sarah Chen remained perfectly still. But those who knew how to read human body language might have noticed the slight relaxation in her shoulders. Admiral Rodriguez had been her commanding officer during the Shadow conflict, one of the few people in the galaxy who knew the full extent of what Navy SEALs were capable of. When the Admiral's voice finally returned, it carried a weight that made the entire security checkpoint fall silent. Officer Thrax, I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Do not move the prisoner. Do not process any paperwork. Do not allow anyone else to interact with her. I am personally en route to your station, and I will be there within the hour. But sir, Thrax protested, his confidence rapidly eroding. The charges are quite serious. Falsifying military credentials is a major offense, and the evidence is clear. Her file claims impossible achievements for a human. Officer Thrax, the Admiral's voice cut through the static with laser precision. Let me ask you something. In your security database, do you have access to classification levels above Galactic Council standard? No, sir, but then you don't have access to the real files. What you're looking at is a cover identity, and not even a particularly detailed one. The woman you have in custody possesses clearances that are so far above your pay grade that just knowing her real rank could be considered a breach of galactic security. The Garanian security officer's forearms trembled slightly. Around them, the crowd began to murmur in various alien languages. Even the Veloxians had stopped moving entirely, their tentacles coiled with tension. Sarah finally spoke, her voice calm and measured. Officer Thrax, I recommend you contact your supervisor. This situation is about to become much more complicated than you're prepared to handle. Silence, Thrax barked, but there was less authority in his voice now. You're still a prisoner here regardless of what the Admiral claims. Actually, came another voice from the communication system. She's not. This new voice belonged to Commander Zethkar, the station's commanding officer. A Zentari with decades of experience in galactic security, Zethkar's compound eyes had seen enough classified operations to recognize when something was far beyond normal protocols. Officer Thrax, report to my office immediately. Transfer custody of the human to Admiral Rodriguez when he arrives. Until then, she is to be treated as a diplomatic guest, not a prisoner. But Commander, Thrax protested. The evidence shows exactly what it was designed to show, Commander Zethkar interrupted. Nothing more, nothing less. Office now. As Thrax reluctantly began to remove Sarah's restraints, his hands shaking slightly, Sarah stretched her arms and rolled her shoulders. The zip ties had been tight, but she'd endured far worse during her years of active service. "Officer Thrax," she said quietly, "for what it's worth, you were doing your job correctly. Most of the people who present those kinds of credentials are indeed lying. You had no way of knowing that some lies are designed to hide much bigger truths." The Garanian looked at her with new uncertainty. "What are you really?" "What's a Navy SEAL?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. Even now, even with Admiral Rodriguez on his way, there were limits to what she could reveal. The galaxy's various species had formed their alliances and treaties based on certain assumptions about human military capability. If they knew the truth about what humans could accomplish when properly trained and motivated, it would shift the entire balance of power. "Navy SEALs are specialists," she said finally. "We handle situations that conventional forces can't manage. Deep space reconnaissance, hostage rescue, counterterrorism, underwater demolitions, Arctic survival, desert warfare, zero-gravity combat, and infiltration of hostile territories." "That's impossible," a Zentari trader chittered from the crowd. "Humans lack the physical adaptations for such diverse environments." Sarah turned to look at the trader, her gray eyes steady. "That's exactly what we want you to think." The implications of that statement rippled through the crowd like a wave. If humans were capable of operations in environments that required significant biological adaptations, what did that say about human physiology? More importantly, what did it say about human determination and training methods? "The Arctic training alone should be impossible," a Veloxian diplomat observed, its translator giving its words a musical quality. "Your species evolved in temperate climates. How could you possibly survive in sub-zero conditions for extended periods?" "The human body is more adaptable than most species realize," Sarah replied. "Given proper conditioning, motivation, and training, we can function in environments that would kill us under normal circumstances. The key is understanding that survival isn't just about biology. It's about mindset." She paused, considering how much more she could safely reveal. "During my Arctic warfare training, I spent 6 months on a planet where the average temperature was 40 degrees below what your species would consider survivable. I wasn't just surviving, I was operating, completing missions, gathering intelligence, fighting when necessary." The crowd exchanged glances that didn't require translation. Each species had their environmental specializations. Garanians thrived in high-gravity worlds. Centauri were adapted for desert conditions. Veloxians functioned best in aquatic environments. But no species claimed the ability to adapt to multiple extreme environments through training alone. "What about the underwater demolitions?" Thrax asked, his professional curiosity overcoming his earlier embarrassment. The file mentioned extended underwater operations. "Humans can hold their breath for much longer than most people realize, especially with proper training," Sarah explained. "During my underwater warfare certification, I learned to remain submerged for over 20 minutes while performing complex tasks. The record for static breath holding by a human is over 24 minutes. That caused another stir in the crowd. Most species required breathing apparatus for any extended underwater work. The idea that humans could function submerged for such periods using only their natural lung capacity was almost as shocking as their apparent ability to survive Arctic conditions. "The covert operations," a Garanian guard asked, "behind enemy lines for extended periods. How is that possible without support?" Sarah's expression grew more serious. "That's where things get classified. Let's just say that human persistence and ingenuity can overcome limitations that seem insurmountable to other species. We don't give up. Ever. Even when logic suggests we should." Before anyone could ask another question, the station's docking bay announcements echoed through the corridors. Admiral Rodriguez's ship had arrived ahead of schedule, and the Admiral himself was already making his way to the security checkpoint. The crowd began to disperse, but slowly many aliens clearly hoping to witness whatever was about to happen. Sarah straightened her clothes and checked her appearance in the reflection of a nearby display screen. It had been 2 years since she'd seen the Admiral in person. She wondered if he'd changed as much as the galaxy had. Admiral Rodriguez entered the security checkpoint like a force of nature contained in human form. Even in standard diplomatic attire rather than military uniform, his presence commanded immediate attention from every species present. Tall for a human, with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much war, He moved with the controlled precision of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected billions of lives. The crowd that had lingered to observe the situation suddenly found urgent business elsewhere as the Admiral's gaze swept across them. Security Officer Thrax, who had returned from his commander's office looking substantially humbled, stood at rigid attention despite belonging to a completely different military hierarchy. "Admiral Rodriguez," Sarah said simply, offering a respectful nod. "Ghost," the Admiral replied, using her operational call sign from the Shadow conflict. The single word carried years of shared history, classified missions, and mutual respect earned in the depths of space, where no backup was coming and failure meant death for countless innocents. The few remaining onlookers who understood military protocol recognized the significance of that exchange. Operational call signs weren't used casually, especially not ones that had become legendary in certain circles. Ghost was a name whispered in intelligence briefings and classified after-action reports throughout the galaxy. "Officer Thrax," Admiral Rodriguez said without taking his eyes off Sarah, "I assume the prisoner has been properly cared for during her detention?" "Yes, sir," Thrax replied quickly. No mistreatment occurred. Standard procedures were followed. "Good. Because the woman you detained is responsible for saving more lives than most people kill in a lifetime. The intelligence she gathered during the Shadow conflict prevented what would have been the largest genocide in galactic history." Sarah remained impassive, but those who knew her well might have noticed the slight tightening around her eyes. The Shadow conflict was a period she didn't discuss, even with those who had clearance to know it existed. Admiral Rodriguez turned to address the security checkpoint more broadly. "Let me explain something about Navy SEALs to those of you who are still curious. The name stands for sea, air, and land, referring to the environments where they operate. But that's just the beginning." He began pacing slowly, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture that every human military officer in the galaxy would recognize. "The selection process for Navy SEALs has a failure rate of approximately 80%, not because humans can't physically handle the training, but because most people, regardless of species, lack the mental fortitude required to push beyond what their bodies tell them is possible." A Zentari security guard clicked his mandibles nervously. "What kind of mental training produces such results?" "The kind that starts with a simple question," Admiral Rodriguez replied. "When your body tells you that you're at your limit, when every instinct screams at you to quit, when logic itself suggests that continuing is impossible, what do you do?" Navy SEALs are trained to answer that question the same way every time. They continue. Sarah spoke up, her voice carrying the weight of experience. "During Hell Week, candidates are kept awake for 5.5 days while performing continuous physical and mental challenges. They run over 200 miles, swim countless hours in frigid water, and carry boats on their heads across sand dunes. The point isn't to teach swimming or running. The point is to teach that the human mind can override the human body's limitations." "Impossible," a Veloxian diplomat stated flatly. "No species can function without sleep for that duration while maintaining physical performance." "Most species can't," Admiral Rodriguez agreed. "Humans discover they can when they have no other choice. The interesting thing about humans is that we don't know our own limits until we're forced to find them. And even then, those limits keep moving." He gestured toward Sarah. "Ghost here holds records that are still classified, but I can tell you that during her final evaluation, she spent 14 days behind simulated enemy lines with no food, limited water, and hostile forces actively hunting her. Not only did she evade capture, she gathered intelligence on enemy positions, disrupted their communications, and completed her extraction at the designated time and location." 14 days without food?" Thrax asked, his rocky features showing disbelief. "The human body can survive much longer than that without food, provided the mind remains focused on survival rather than comfort," Sarah explained. "It's not pleasant, but it's possible. Navy SEALs learn to function while hungry, sleep-deprived, cold, injured, and under extreme stress because those are often the conditions where our services are most needed." Admiral Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "But the physical training is only half the equation. Navy SEALs also receive extensive education in languages, cultures, advanced mathematics, physics, engineering, medicine, and psychology. Ghost speaks 7 galactic languages fluently and has advanced degrees in astrophysics and xenobiology." This revelation caused another stir among the observers. The combination of extreme physical capability with advanced intellectual training was uncommon in most military organizations. Specialists typically chose either physical or mental development, not both. During the Kethmore crisis, Admiral Rodriguez continued, Ghost infiltrated their command structure by posing as a captured scientist. She spent 3 months transmitting intelligence while pretending to work on their weapons systems. When extraction became impossible, she sabotaged their primary computer core and fought her way through 17 decks of enemy ship to reach an escape pod. 17 decks? A Garanian guard asked. How many Kethmore warriors would that be? Sarah's expression remained neutral. Enough, Admiral Rodriguez smiled grimly. Kethmore are natural warriors. Stronger than most species, faster than humans with natural weapons and armor. Ghost disabled 43 of them during her escape, using improvised weapons and environmental hazards, because she couldn't carry traditional armaments without compromising her cover identity. The security checkpoint had fallen completely silent. Even the background hum of the station's systems seemed muted as the implications sank in. A single human had fought through dozens of trained alien warriors using nothing but improvised weapons and tactical knowledge. The real question, Admiral Rodriguez said, his voice dropping to a more serious tone, is why Ghost is traveling under a cover identity now. The shadow conflict ended 2 years ago. She should be retired, enjoying a peaceful life somewhere safe. Sarah met his gaze steadily. The Void Fleet is returning, Admiral. Long-range sensors have detected ship signatures in the outer dark. The same configuration we saw before the last war, but in greater numbers. The Admiral's expression hardened. How many ships? At least 3 times the fleet strength they deployed during the shadow conflict. And sir, they're not heading for the outer rim this time. Their trajectory suggests they're coming straight for the core worlds. Admiral Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. The Void Fleet had been the most serious threat the galaxy had faced in centuries. Their technology was advanced, their tactics were ruthless, and their goal appeared to be the complete subjugation of all inhabited star systems. How long do we have? He asked. Based on their current speed and trajectory, 18 months. Maybe less if they have new propulsion technology. Admiral Rodriguez turned to address Security Officer Thrax and the few remaining observers. What you've witnessed here today is classified at the highest levels. Any discussion of this conversation outside official channels will be considered an act of treason against galactic security. He paused, looking each alien in the eye. You now understand why Navy SEALs are not listed in standard military databases. You also understand why their existence is carefully compartmentalized. The galaxy has enemies that require responses beyond conventional military capability. Sarah stepped forward. Admiral, I need immediate transport to Earth. The intelligence I'm carrying cannot be transmitted through normal channels. Granted. My ship is standing by. Admiral Rodriguez turned back to Thrax one final time. Officer, your dedication to duty is commendable. But in the future, when someone presents credentials claiming impossible achievements, consider the possibility that human definitions of impossible might be different from yours. The journey to Earth aboard Admiral Rodriguez's flagship gave Sarah and the Admiral time to discuss the full scope of what she had discovered during her deep space reconnaissance mission. The ship's conference room was secured against all forms of electronic surveillance, allowing them to speak freely about classified matters. Show me everything, Admiral Rodriguez said as he activated the room's holographic display system. Sarah connected her encrypted data storage device to the ship's computer. 3-dimensional images filled the air around them, showing long-range sensor readings, ship configurations, and tactical analyses that had taken her months to compile. The Void Fleet has been building their forces in the Dark Nebula for the past 2 years, she began, manipulating the display to show fleet movements and positions. But they're not just rebuilding, they're evolving. The Admiral studied the ship configurations with growing concern. These designs are different from what we encountered during the Shadow conflict. Completely redesigned from the ground up, Sarah confirmed. Larger ships, heavier armor, and weapon systems that appear to be based on technology we've never seen before. But that's not the worst part. She highlighted a section of the data showing population estimates and resource allocation patterns. They're not just planning another war, Admiral. They're planning extermination. The logistics profile suggests they're preparing for a campaign that will last decades and involve the complete sterilization of inhabited worlds. Admiral Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, processing the implications. How did you gather this intelligence? The dark nebula has been impenetrable to our sensors since the last war ended. Sarah's expression grew distant as she recalled the mission. I went in alone using a modified stealth ship that could mimic Void Fleet energy signatures. Spent 8 months moving between their outposts, documenting everything I could find. 8 months alone in hostile territory, the Admiral mused. Even for a Navy SEAL, that's pushing the limits of human endurance. The hardest part wasn't the physical challenges, Sarah admitted. It was maintaining cover while watching them prepare for genocide. I saw training facilities where they practice urban warfare against holographic representations of human cities. I documented production lines manufacturing weapons specifically designed to penetrate human defensive systems. She manipulated the display to show weapon specifications and tactical doctrine analyses. They've studied every engagement from the Shadow conflict. They know how we fight, how we think, how we adapt. This time they're coming prepared for everything we threw at them before. Admiral Rodriguez studied the data for several minutes, his military mind already beginning to formulate potential responses. What about allies? The Centauri Coalition, the Veloxian Assembly, the Goranian Defense Forces. That's where it gets complicated, Sarah replied grimly. The Void Fleet has been sending diplomatic envoys to several species, offering terms for surrender that would allow limited autonomy in exchange for cooperation against human forces. They're trying to isolate us politically before they attack. Militarily, the Admiral realized. Exactly. And some species are listening. The Kethmore have already signed a non-aggression pact. The Thorian Empire is considering similar terms. Even some factions within the Centauri Coalition are questioning whether supporting humanity is worth the potential cost. Admiral Rodriguez stood and began pacing around the conference table. They're using our own success against us. Every time Navy SEALs have completed an impossible mission, every time human forces have overcome seemingly insurmountable odds, we've made other species more aware of what we're capable of. Now they're afraid of us. Fear and respect are often separated by very thin lines, Sarah observed. The galaxy has seen humans accomplish things that should be impossible. But they've also seen us do those things while protecting other species, not conquering them. The Void Fleet is offering an alternative where they don't have to worry about human capabilities being turned against them. How much time do we have to prepare? Sarah highlighted the fleet movement patterns again. Based on their current trajectory and the logistics required for an operation of this magnitude, they'll reach the outer rim in 18 months. But Admiral, they're not planning to stop at the outer rim this time. Intelligence suggests they'll use a leapfrog strategy, establishing forward bases while continuing to push toward the core worlds. Earth will be a primary target, Admiral Rodriguez stated. Earth will be the primary target, Sarah corrected. Everything else is just clearing the path. They believe that if they can eliminate humanity's homeworld and military leadership, the rest of human space will collapse without coordinated resistance. The Admiral stopped pacing and looked directly at Sarah. What do you recommend? We need to do what Navy SEALs do best, she replied without hesitation. We need to attack the problem from an angle they're not expecting. Conventional military responses won't work against a force this large and well-prepared. But unconventional warfare, asymmetric tactics, and deep strike operations might give us advantages they haven't planned for. She stood and moved to the display, highlighting specific locations within Void Fleet territory. During my reconnaissance, I identified 17 critical infrastructure targets, communication relays, fuel depots, manufacturing centers, and command facilities that their entire operation depends on. If we could eliminate even half of these targets before their main offensive begins, we could cripple their ability to sustain a long-term campaign. Deep strike operations behind enemy lines, Admiral Rodriguez mused. You're talking about missions that would make the Shadow conflict look like a training exercise. I'm talking about missions that only Navy SEALs could accomplish, Sarah said firmly. Small teams operating independently for extended periods, with no possibility of extraction or reinforcement. The kind of operations that require personnel who simply refuse to accept failure as an option. Admiral Rodriguez studied the target locations, his mind already calculating the resources and personnel required. How many teams would we need? Minimum of 12 teams, 4 operators each. Maximum operational time of 6 months per mission. 0 electronic communication with command until mission completion or compromise. 48 operators willing to Undertake missions with minimal chance of survival, the Admiral summarized. 48. Operators who understand that their individual survival is less important than preventing galactic genocide, Sarah corrected. The Admiral was quiet for a long moment, weighing the strategic implications against the human cost. And you're volunteering to lead one of these teams. I'm volunteering to train all of these teams and lead the most critical mission personally, Sarah replied. The primary command facility in the Void Fleet's central staging area. If we can eliminate their command structure while other teams are hitting infrastructure targets, we might be able to create enough chaos to delay their offensive by years, or we might just make them angry enough to accelerate their timeline, Admiral Rodriguez pointed out. Sarah smiled grimly. Admiral, they're already planning to exterminate every human in the galaxy. I'm not sure how much angrier they can get. Admiral Rodriguez returned to his chair and began reviewing the mission parameters more carefully. Assuming we can get authorization for these operations, how long would you need to prepare the teams? 8 months for full training and mission preparation. 4 months if we use only experienced SEALs who've already completed deep space operations. Training. That would leave us with only 6 months before the Void Fleet reaches striking distance of inhabited systems. 6 months is enough time to complete the primary missions if everything goes according to plan, Sarah said. Of course, no plan survives contact with the enemy, especially when the enemy has been preparing for 2 years to counter every tactic we've used before, the Admiral added. Sarah nodded. Which is why we'll have to develop entirely new tactics, the kind that push human capabilities beyond anything we've attempted before. Admiral Rodriguez looked at the holographic display one more time, then began shutting down the secure systems. We'll be at Earth in 6 hours. I'll arrange for immediate briefings with Strategic Command and the Joint Chiefs. This intelligence changes everything. Admiral, Sarah said as they prepared to leave the conference room. There's one more thing you should know. During my time in Void Fleet territory, I learned something about why they're so determined to eliminate humanity specifically. What did you learn? They're afraid of us. Not just our military capabilities or our technology. They're afraid of what we represent. Every other species in the galaxy has natural limitations that define what they can and cannot accomplish. Humans seem to have no such limitations. We adapt, we overcome, we refuse to accept defeat even when logic suggests we should. Sarah paused in the doorway. The Void Fleet's leadership believes that as long as humans exist, no other species will ever be truly safe from the possibility of being surpassed or replaced. They see us as an evolutionary threat to the established order of the galaxy. Admiral Rodriguez considered this revelation. So this isn't just about territory or resources. No, sir. This is about survival. They believe it's either them or us, and they've decided it's going to be them. Earth's Strategic Command Center had seen many crisis meetings over the years, but none quite like this one. The underground facility, buried beneath the Swiss Alps and shielded against every known form of detection, housed the most secure communication and planning systems in human space. Today, it was filled with the highest-ranking military officers from across the galaxy, all gathered to hear Sarah Chen's intelligence briefing. General Morrison, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, called the meeting to order. As the holographic displays around the room activated, representatives from 12 different star systems participated via encrypted quantum communication links, their images flickering slightly due to the vast distances involved. Ladies and gentlemen, General Morrison began, what you're about to hear is classified at black-level protocols. The intelligence gathered by Agent Chen represents the most significant threat to human survival since first contact with hostile alien species. Sarah stood at the center of the room, surrounded by three-dimensional displays showing the full scope of her reconnaissance data. She had spent the previous 18 hours preparing detailed briefings for each aspect of the Void Fleet's preparations. The enemy has designated this operation Final Silence, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the room's advanced audio systems. Their objective is not conquest or subjugation. It is complete extermination of the human species and any allied species that refuse to cooperate. Admiral Kim, commander of the Outer Rim Defense Forces, leaned forward in his chair. Agent Chen, your report indicates they have over 3,000 ships prepared for this operation. Our combined fleet strength is less than 800 vessels. Correct, Sarah confirmed. Direct naval engagement would result in complete defeat within 6 months. However, their fleet requires extensive logistical support to maintain operations across such vast distances. That support infrastructure is vulnerable to asymmetric warfare tactics. She highlighted the 17 target locations she had identified during her reconnaissance mission. Each of these facilities represents a critical link in their operational chain. Fuel processing, ammunition manufacturing, communication relay stations, and command centers that coordinate fleet movements across multiple star systems. General Reeves from Mars Command studied the target data carefully. The distances involved are enormous. Even our fastest ships would require months to reach these locations, and that's assuming they could penetrate enemy territory undetected. Which is why traditional military approaches won't work, Sarah replied. These missions require small teams capable of extended independent operations in hostile territory. Teams that can survive for months without resupply while gathering intelligence and preparing for simultaneous strikes against multiple targets. You're talking about Navy SEAL operations on an unprecedented scale, Admiral Rodriguez observed from his position at the table. Not just Navy SEALs, Sarah corrected. We'll need the best operators from every Special Forces unit in human space. Army Rangers, Marine Force Recon, Air Force Pararescue, and Space Force Deep Operations Specialists. Teams with members specifically chosen for their ability to operate in the extreme conditions we'll encounter. General Morrison activated a secure display showing personnel files from across the military. How many operators are we talking about, and what kind of success rate can we realistically expect? Sarah manipulated the holographic display to show mission timelines and probability calculations. 48 operators divided into 12 teams of 4. Each team will be responsible for one primary target and 2 secondary objectives. Based on the intelligence I gathered about enemy patrol patterns and defensive capabilities, I estimate a 60% chance of mission success if all teams can reach their targets undetected. And the survival rate for the operators? General Reeves asked quietly. Sarah paused before answering. Approximately 30%. These are one-way missions for most teams. Extraction will only be possible if our main fleet can establish forward operating positions during the confusion following the initial strikes. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They were discussing sending 48 of humanity's best soldiers on missions where 2/3 of them would not return home. There has to be another way, Admiral Kim said finally. Some alternative that doesn't require such sacrifices. Admiral, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was proposing. The alternative is the extinction of our species. The Void Fleet isn't interested in negotiations or conditional surrenders. They've decided that humans represent an existential threat to the galactic order, and they're preparing to eliminate that threat permanently. She activated recordings from her reconnaissance mission, showing Void Fleet training facilities and production centers. They're manufacturing weapons specifically designed to penetrate human ship armor. They're training assault troops using holographic recreations of human cities. They've studied every battle from the Shadow conflict and developed countermeasures for every tactic we employed. General Morrison studied the tactical displays with growing concern. Agent Chen, in your assessment, what would happen if we attempted a conventional defensive strategy? Complete defeat within 18 months, Sarah answered without hesitation. They have overwhelming numerical superiority, technological advantages we can't match, and tactical knowledge of our capabilities. A defensive war would be a slow suicide. Admiral Rodriguez spoke up from his position. But if these deep strike operations succeed, what then? Even if we eliminate their command structure and critical infrastructure, they still have 3,000 ships and millions of trained soldiers. The goal isn't to destroy their entire force, Sarah explained. The goal is to create enough chaos and disruption to delay their offensive while we prepare for a different kind of war. A war where human adaptability and persistence become advantages rather than curiosities. She changed the display to show population distribution and resource allocation patterns across human space. If we can buy ourselves 2 additional years, we can implement protocols that will fundamentally change how humanity approaches warfare. Protocols that take advantage of our unique capabilities. What kind of protocols? General Reeves asked. Sarah hesitated, knowing that what she was about to propose would sound like science fiction to most of the officers in the room. Enhanced human performance protocols, genetic optimization, neural interface technology, and cybernetic augmentation systems that push human capabilities beyond biological limitations. You're talking about creating super soldiers, Admiral Kim said with obvious skepticism. I'm talking about creating humans who can operate in environments and conditions that would kill normal people, Sarah corrected. Soldiers who can survive in the vacuum of space without life support, who can function underwater for hours, who can process information at superhuman speeds, and who can repair their own injuries using integrated medical systems. General Morrison leaned back in his chair. The ethical implications alone would take years to resolve. Sir, with respect, we don't have years to debate ethics, Sarah replied firmly. The Void Fleet has already decided that our ethics, our values, and our very existence are threats that must be eliminated. They're not going to give us time to have philosophical discussions about the morality of human enhancement. She activated a new set of displays showing research data from classified military development programs. The technology already exists. We've been developing it for decades as individual components. Enhanced reflexes, improved healing factors, neural interface systems that allow direct brain-computer interaction. We just haven't integrated these systems into a comprehensive enhancement protocol. How long would such integration take? Admiral Rodriguez asked. With unlimited resources and emergency authorization, 18 months to develop the first generation of enhanced soldiers. Another 6 months to train them for deep space operations. That's 2 years total, General Morrison observed. The same timeline you mentioned for delaying the Void Fleet offensive. Exactly. If the deep strike missions succeed in disrupting their operations, we can use that time to develop capabilities they haven't planned for. When they finally do launch their offensive, they'll face human soldiers who are fundamentally different from anything they've studied or prepared for. Admiral Kim studied the enhancement protocols with growing interest. What kind of performance improvements are we talking about? Sarah smiled grimly. Soldiers who can jump 50 meters in standard gravity. Soldiers who can see in complete darkness and hear sounds across electromagnetic spectrums. Soldiers who can survive direct hits from energy weapons that would vaporize normal humans. Soldiers who can operate continuously for weeks without sleep, food, or water. You're describing capabilities that sound more like science fiction than military technology, General Reeves said. General, 3 years ago, the idea of a single human operator infiltrating Void Fleet territory for 8 months and gathering detailed intelligence on their entire military operation would have sounded like science fiction too, Sarah replied. The difference between science fiction and reality is often just a matter of motivation and necessity. 14 months later, Sarah Chen stood in the observation deck of the stealth ship Phantom's Edge, watching as 11 other ships dispersed into the darkness of space, each carrying a 4-person team toward targets that would determine the fate of humanity. The months of preparation had transformed both the operators and the nature of human warfare itself. The recruitment process had been unlike anything in military history. Sarah had personally interviewed over 300 candidates from Special Forces units across human space, looking for individuals who possessed not just exceptional skills, but the psychological profile necessary to undertake missions with minimal chance of survival. The volunteers who made the final selection were extraordinary even by Navy SEAL standards. Master Sergeant Chen Li, a former Army Ranger who had survived 47 combat operations without a single casualty among his teams. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Okafor, a Marine Force recon specialist who held records for underwater endurance that seemed to defy human physiology. Captain James Morrison, an Air Force pararescue operator who had completed rescue missions in conditions so extreme that other species considered them unsurvivable. Each of the 48 operators had undergone enhancements that pushed the boundaries of human capability, neural interfaces that allowed direct communication with computer systems, cardiovascular modifications that enabled function in low-oxygen environments for extended periods, skeletal reinforcement that could withstand impacts that would shatter normal human bones, enhanced healing factors that could repair wounds in hours rather than weeks. But the most significant enhancement was psychological. Each operator had received conditioning that reinforced the human trait that other species found most disturbing: the absolute refusal to accept defeat. Even when logic suggested that surrender was the only rational choice, enhanced humans would continue fighting until their last breath. Ghost leader to all teams, Sarah spoke into her neural communication interface. Final status check before communication blackout. One by one, the team leaders reported their readiness. Each team carried enough supplies for 6 months of independent operation, along with weapons and equipment specifically designed for their individual target profiles. More importantly, each team carried detailed intelligence about Void Fleet operations that could only have been gathered by someone who had spent months moving freely through their territory. All teams report ready, Sarah announced to Admiral Rodriguez, who was monitoring the operation from the command ship positioned safely outside the combat zone. Initiating communication blackout protocols now. Understood, Ghost Leader. Good hunting. The neural interface fell silent as all teams activated stealth protocols designed to make their ships invisible to Void Fleet sensors. From this point forward, each team would operate completely independently, with no possibility of coordination or support from command. Sarah's team was responsible for the most critical target, the central command facility that coordinated Void Fleet operations across 17 star systems. Located deep within a heavily fortified asteroid base, the facility was protected by defensive systems that had been specifically designed to counter human military technology. What they hadn't prepared for was human military technology enhanced by 18 months of desperate innovation and the integration of capabilities that other species considered impossible. Team Ghost. Beginning final approach to target, Sarah announced to her 3 companions. Each of them represented the absolute pinnacle of human military capability, enhanced beyond the normal limitations of biology and physics. Sergeant First Class David Park, a former Navy SEAL who had volunteered for experimental cybernetic integration that replaced 70% of his nervous system with quantum processors. His reaction time was now measured in microseconds rather than milliseconds, and his accuracy with any weapon system approached mathematical perfection. Chief Petty Officer Maria Santos, a demolitions expert whose enhanced spatial reasoning allowed her to calculate explosive yields and structural weaknesses with computer-like precision. Her modifications included internal fabrication systems that could manufacture explosives from raw materials found in most industrial environments. Captain Thomas Anderson, a communications specialist whose neural interfaces could hack into any computer system by establishing direct quantum connections with processing cores. His enhanced memory could store and analyze terabytes of data without external systems. Together, they represented humanity's answer to the question of what humans could become when survival depended on transcending normal limitations. The asteroid base appeared on their sensors as they approached the outer perimeter of Void Fleet space. Massive compared to human installations, it housed over 50,000 alien personnel and contained computer systems that managed fleet movements across half the galaxy. Beginning infiltration protocol, Sarah announced as their ship approached the asteroid's docking bays. The stealth systems that had taken them this far would be useless once they were inside the base. But they had other advantages that the Void Fleet hadn't anticipated. The infiltration took 6 hours of careful movement through maintenance tunnels and service corridors. Enhanced human reflexes and improved sensory capabilities allowed them to avoid detection by security systems designed to catch normal biological entities. When they finally reached the central computer core, Sarah was reminded of her previous infiltration of Kethmore facilities during the Shadow conflict. But this time she wasn't alone and she wasn't pretending to be something she wasn't. This time, she was exactly what the Void Fleet feared most, a human who had refused to accept the limitations that other species considered absolute. Anderson, how long do you need to access their command protocols? Sarah asked as the communications specialist approached the primary interface. 12 minutes to establish connection, another 8 to download their complete operational database, Anderson replied. His neural interface is already beginning to probe the alien computer systems. Santos, place charges at primary structural points. We want this facility completely destroyed once we extract the intelligence. Copy that. Charges will be ready in 15 minutes. Park, establish perimeter security. If anyone discovers us before Anderson finishes his download, we need time to complete the mission. Sarah activated her own neural interfaces and began accessing secondary computer systems. The intelligence she gathered here would provide human forces with complete knowledge of Void Fleet capabilities, tactical doctrines, and operational plans. What she found exceeded even her worst expectations. The Void Fleet wasn't just planning to eliminate humanity. They were planning to eliminate any species that showed potential for adaptation and technological advancement. Humans were merely the first target in a campaign designed to ensure that the Void Fleet would never face challenges to their dominance again. Ghost Leader, Anderson announced, I'm detecting communication from other teams. Multiple targets have been successfully eliminated. Sarah felt a moment of pride for the operators she had trained and led into this impossible mission. Against all odds, human determination and enhanced capabilities were proving superior to Void Fleet preparations. Charges are set, Santos reported. We have a 12-minute window for extraction once I activate the detonation sequence. Anderson status on data download? Complete. I have their entire operational database, including contingency plans for dealing with enhanced human soldiers. Sarah felt a chill of recognition. They know about the enhancement protocols? Yes, but their countermeasures are based on theoretical projections. They underestimated how far human enhancement could actually progress. Pack it up, people. Time to show them what humans do when faced with impossible odds. The extraction from the asteroid base became a running battle, as Void Fleet security forces finally detected their presence. But enhanced humans fighting in close quarters proved to be beyond anything the aliens had prepared for. Park's cybernetic reflexes allowed him to engage multiple targets simultaneously. Santos used her spatial reasoning to turn the base's own structure into weapons against its defenders. Anderson hacked security systems in real time, turning automated defenses against their former masters. Sarah led the team through 17 levels of hostile territory, using tactics and capabilities that existed, because humans had decided that normal limitations were just suggestions to be overcome through determination and innovation. When their extraction ship finally lifted, off from the asteroid's docking bay, the entire command facility was collapsing behind them in a carefully orchestrated series of explosions that would cripple Void Fleet coordination for months. Ghost Leader to all teams, Sarah announced as they cleared the asteroid's debris field. Mission accomplished. Enhanced human capabilities have proven superior to enemy preparations. We are returning to base with intelligence that will change the course of this war. As the stealth ship engaged its quantum drive and disappeared into the depths of space, Sarah reflected on what they had accomplished. 48 humans had penetrated the most secure installations in Void Fleet territory, gathered critical intelligence, and eliminated infrastructure that had taken years to construct.